What's up, everybody? Sorry it's taken me so long to get a new video. We had to do like some change-ups of workspace, so kind of got falling behind. But welcome to the new Sosa workspace in his box. So I miss you all, and I hope we're doing well still. But I wanted to review two assignments today. This one's just going to be about assignment 7, which was this one. So I have a couple of kiddos already, like early on, did the assignments, so I kind of have some of their answers I want to share. But it's kind of cool stuff, so let's unpack it. First, I want to talk about the painting. A lot of us kind of got to the key stuff, so I wanted to show you. So here, the painting, of course, looks like this in color. It was by Marcel Verdier, who is a French guy, and question, the key notices piece, everyone kind of noticed about the setup, a lot of things. You had, like, the slave master over here, and you had his wife and, as I assume, child or daughter here, and then you had a bunch of the slaves gathered around. The key thing I wanted you to see, and I kind of tried to point to the thing in question 1, where it talks about, the question is, what do you notice about the person who is beating the slave tied to the 4 stakes? And that is another slave right here who is having to beat the slave that, I think the slave ran away. So by having a slave beat another slave in front of other slaves, there's multiple layers of pain that are inflicted in this particular painting depicted. And the history of the painting is the artist intended to paint this not as a way to glorify slavery, but as a way to try and show these horrors of slavery as a form of what we'll talk later in assignment 8, but as a form of abolition and this resistance against slavery. A couple, like, some people, when it got to question 2, where it said your opinion, here's what a couple of your classmates said. Quinn, hey Quinn, what's up? She says, quote, "The person beating the slave has to deal with the fact that he is torturing someone, probably someone of his own kind who has dealt with the same horrors. It is sickening, but he was probably threatened into doing it. He had to choose his own life and body over someone else's, and to be stripped down of his own humanity and ethics as times were too bleak." So by looking at if this is a physical pain or a psychological pain, how it captures the psychological pain, Quinn, I think, talks about a really cool or a really powerful idea, this idea of, he has to beat someone who is the same as him. But also, she mentions that the person who had to do the beating was stripped of his humanity. And then the person on the floor, we see, is stripped entirely of his clothing. So multiple layers of this physical idea of being stripped of something, and then psychological stripping is powerful. Quinn, awesome. Gabby Franco says, quote, "I think it is very vivid physical torture that's displayed in this photo. However, the psychological or the emotional pain not only stems from an oppressed black man being being beaten and dehumanized by another black man, but it's also it's the other people not doing anything and just watching, frantic and scared, as if normal people for being harmed, as if it is normal for people being harmed. During this time, this was a normal dehumanizing people, and harming people was normal." So she talks that, like, this act of dehumanization is a huge psychological form of pain that existed at this time. And then the fact that they had what's called bystander effect is kind of people who are just watching from the sidelines, people who are the other enslaved Africans who are on the side are just kind of stuck watching all of this happen to possibly one of their family members. So nice job unpacking the painting. Moving on to the Whitney Plantation. I thought the Whitney Plantation was pretty cool. I tried to find as many good videos as I could. There are plenty more out there, none that really went into in-depth tour. I would have had to piece together multiple videos, and one was like 15 minutes. So these I found were the most substantive. But Quinn also found a psychological pain in video 1. She said, that there is a hateful hierarchy was built between domestic slaves, field hands, and slave drivers, leading to more conflict and enemies for slaves to deal with. That was Quinn. What she meant is this hierarchy is a ranking. So you have certain people at the bottom, right above them, right on top. And what white slave owners did is they created this system, this pyramid almost, which, you had certain slaves who were considered, slave drivers. Then you had this ranking system. So you had slaves who were now ranking on top of each other, who would have to boss each other around and hurt each other, and also create this tension amongst slaves themselves. So it's this kind of, not only was it just this physical labor, but they created this system, this gap between really low slaves and higher up slaves, which created this envy and this other type of psychological struggle that existed. Moving on to video 3, which was the one talking about telling the story of slavery, the last video. For question 1, question 1 was, the owner of the Whitney plantation is John Cummings, self-described, quote, rich white boy. Is it okay, the question was, is it okay that John Cummings owns the Whitney plantation now and tries to make it into this historic site in honor of, to memorialize slavery? Is that okay for a white person to have that responsibility? Lena says, quote, I don't think it's okay because I see what he's trying to do, but I don't think he understands the suffering and cruelty that slaves had to face. He doesn't have a right to do that because his race never had to go through that. And Lena, that she brings up an argument that a lot of people have, with the sense of, like, do white people have the full understanding to do these things? And I think that's why he hired Dr. Seck to run the true history of the museum. It was almost like John Cummings was able to provide the foundation, and Dr. Seck, who is from a country in Africa, I think it was Senegal, I can't remember, in which a lot of Africans were enslaved and brought to America. And he, Dr. Seck, was the one who really had to tell the story of Whitney Plantation. So I think, so Lena brings up a good point there. Question 2 says, Dr. Ibrahim Seck says that once slaves were, quote, freed, they just opened the gates of the plantation. Just like, blink, all right, good, you're free, now go. That's all they did. And the slaves could walk out. But then Dr. Seck states, quote, what is freedom? Freedom has to go with civil rights. My question to you is, what is he saying by that? What really is freedom? So you can't just open the gates and say you're free. That's not really how it works. There's a lot more that comes with it. And Sanaya brings up this point. She says, quote, when slaves walked out of the gates, they were still technically not free. They still would be looked at different, and they wouldn't be able to do as they pleased. If you think about it, they weren't free to go and do the same things that white people did. African Americans might have been, quote, freed, but they will always still be trapped because they will never be treated equally. Sanaya, I think that's exactly what Dr. Seck was really trying to get at, the idea of, yes, they have their physical freedom and then they can go to these places, but there's no equality. There's still limitations on all of the things that these people would be able to do. It's not as simple as saying, okay, gates are open, go ahead. It wasn't like that. Quinn also says to this, quote, it is not really freedom. Due to slaves being treated with indecency through their time of labor, the widespread mindset of Americans was that they were still lesser. This will create a struggle for African Americans to provide for themselves and make money. They will have limited access to things for decades, as segregation was in its peak over a century after slaves were freed. And even attitude and courtesy to them will be scarce. Civil rights means an equal opportunity for money, resources, and decency between others, which will not be achieved through liberating plantations. And Quinn, you kind of unpacked exactly, again, just another layer of what Sanaya and Dr. Seck were saying, but there was this mindset that existed amongst white slave owners and many white people in antebellum America that there was a difference between white people and black people. And by freeing slaves from plantations did not mean that that mindset just evaporated. So the physical act of freeing is not the same, was not the same as the unpacking the psychological struggle that these now freed slaves had to experience. And still, we still have the legacy of the divide and the racial tension between certain white people and black people. So it's just way more complex than just simple freeing. And finally, I want to go over, oh, sorry, question 3, Sybil Haydel Morial, who, super cool, she was like the great-great-great-granddaughter of one of the slaves at the Whitney Plantation. She says, quote, "It's important to understand the past because when we understand how attitudes have developed, let me do that again." She says, quote, "It is important to understand the past because then we understand how attitudes have developed because of the past. Which type of pain do you think had a longer lasting impact, psychological or physical?" And Quinn says, quote, "The mindset for non-slaves was also long-lasting. The notion that African Americans are lesser than white people can be found even in the modern day, centuries after the actual events of slavery. The prejudice, while sickening, was morphed into something easier to conceptualize than what was apparent. Through the bandwagon effect and upbringing, racism continued and continues to spread." So again, Quinn unpacks this idea that slavery has this lasting impact. It's not as simple as letting people off the plantations. It's changing a mindset that existed of white slave owners. And then it's also changing a mindset that existed of non-white slave owners, just this racism. Like, that is the long-lasting legacy. And the physical things are as brutal as they were. The psychological mindsets and attitudes still has a profound impact, and we're still trying to figure out how best to do that. For assignment 7, there was one thing I wanted to review. It kind of tripped a couple of us up, but it was looking at video 1. It was question 2 of video 1. The question 2 of video 1 says, "Dr. Seck also shows you the painting that we looked at from part 1 of the assignment, this painting." Well, we just unpacked. All right. When he brings the girl to the Gwendolyn Midlow Hall, LA's, what does Dr. Seck say about the painting? So Sanaya caught it, so thanks, Sanaya. Nice job. Sanaya writes, quote, "He also says that the slaves would beat each other while the master watched," in regards to the painting. Okay, he stated that it was a system of divide and conquer. Also, that there was a lot of hatred between the field hands and the domestics. But in the time of revolution, they all got together. So not only did slaves hate their white slave owners, but they also hated the higher up enslaved people on the plantations. And it created that tension, going back to what we talked about previously. So I thought assignment 7 was good at kind of unpacking and getting deeper into the complexities of slavery and all of these different tensions. So I hope it kind of opened, kind of taught you more about these physical and psychological effects of slavery and these pains of slavery. So thank you for watching this one, and yeah, hopefully you check out video 8, and we'll go from there.